You're listening to The Fix with Ryan Rothstein, live from the Prop Swap studios of AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Prop swap that ticket and cash in while the odds have improved. Once again, here's Ryan.
All right, welcome back to The Fix, live in the Prop Swap studios. A couple minutes after 10:30, so you know what time it is. Time for your football fix with NFL Eagles insider John McMullen. And Jim Schwartz officially steps down as Eagles defensive coordinator, yet it seems like he left that door slightly open for a potential return. John, fill us in.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think people believe Jim is going to retire. And that was really the original report. He's going to take a year off and sort of see where he is from a health standpoint. And ultimately, I expect to see him back in the NFL in 2022. But obviously, it's not going to be here. So, it's a big hole. And a lot of people want change. So we'll see how it works. I often talk about, people assume new is better all the time, and new is not necessarily better. And if you think about it from a standpoint of a product or a business or something of that nature, the majority of times new things fail. That's especially in professional sports, when you have a bad season, people want change. And Jeffrey Lurie is one of those people. And we told you about scapegoats, and they were coming. And a lot of people are speculating whether, the Eagles weren't going to bring him back anyway and sort of let him have that parachute out of town without the fire tag with his contract expiring. Same thing with Rich Scangarello and Marty Morningwig. It's just more scapegoats this year than previous years because 4-11-1.
You also have an article up on phillyvoice.com with enough with the tanking, and you and I have talked a lot about this already throughout the week, but just kind of go over the Cliff Notes version of that article posted up today and available on phillyvoice.com, just talking about Sunday night and the amount of attention that it's gotten and how it's kind of blocking people's visions of the real root issues surrounding this team.
Well, from the team standpoint, they have so many issues, and we just talked about one of them. They need a new defensive coordinator. They probably need a new offensive coordinator. If they bring that position back, they're going to need other position coaches. I don't think we've seen the last of the changes or the removals from the coaching staff. We know Carson Wentz is issue number one. They have to make a decision on that. That is getting weird play today. And, man, I hope the Eagles make that decision quick because everybody's going nuts when it comes to Carson Wentz. And the personnel as a whole is probably the biggest issue of all. And people keep talking about tanking and a meaningless game from the Eagles' standpoint. Look, I get the emotion of the New York Giants being upset. I get that perfectly. But, it happens to teams every year on the bubble. I talked about it. Could be a good team, could be a bad team. And ultimately, teams get kicked out of the playoffs every year because somebody isn't doing something as far as trying to win a football game, maybe like they are in Week 6 or Week 7. Just part of it, unfortunately. I don't like it. But the Eagles are hardly the first team to do it. So I think it was more of the timing. And then Miles Sanders, look, he threw accelerant on that fire. And it sure seems like, I've mentioned this all week. Everybody knew Nate Sudfeld was scheduled to play. I don't know where Miles is getting that, to be honest. And maybe it was because he was hurt. And he wasn't part of the game plan. He wasn't part of preparation. But everybody knew he was going to play. People were wishing him luck. Teammates. So it's that part of it's a little bit weird. But from an Eagles standpoint, look, the Giants and their fans could be as angry as they want. From an Eagles standpoint, it's time to turn the page and look at more important issues.
When do you think we're going to get the official announcement, or, more importantly, the team is going to make actual decisions? The Carson Wentz story with Jalen Hurts, I don't think that's coming anytime soon. I don't think any of them are coming anytime soon. But what's the first big roster move that you feel like will fall first?
Well, remember, the new league year doesn't start till March, so that's generally when everything starts to happen. And we know, the Eagles have already restructured the contracts just for bookkeeping of Alshon Jeffrey and Malik Jackson. But those two moves were clear indications they're going to be released when the Eagles can release them. So we know Deshaun Jackson's not going to be back. We know, Jason Peters is a free agent, so we know he's not going to be back finally. And then I think the biggest one is the quarterbacks, but and what they're going to do with Carson Wentz, and then Zach Ertz. And ultimately, I think they're going to try to trade him as well. So they have a lot of work to do, to say the least.
Yeah, they certainly do. A ton of work still ahead of them. I want to get outside the Eagles just for a second, because Deshaun Watson and that story is at the top of pretty much all the NFL headlines right now. Do you feel like Watson will be wearing a different jersey next year?
No. It's one of those things where he's upset, and I think it's, look, Deshaun had a phenomenal year. He's probably the best quarterback in this league that didn't make the playoffs. Obviously, the issues with Houston and Bill O'Brien are well documented. He wanted to be involved as the quarterback. A lot of people have criticized Carson Wentz for some of the things he did. There was a really silly story about him today by a national columnist. A lot of people have criticized him for the way he's handled himself as a perceived starting quarterback in this league. Deshaun's upset because he wanted Eric Bieniemy to be the head coach. I wasn't expected to be necessarily listened to, and he wasn't expecting to say, I want him and they're going to hire him, but he did expect them to talk to him, and they didn't even, I think they were the only team with an opening that didn't talk to Eric, who is obviously probably the number one candidate in this hiring cycle. So he's a little upset about that. But Houston can't trade him. He's a superstar player. They're not going to trade him. And certainly their new general manager, unless he wants to be an old general manager very quickly, is not going to trade Deshaun Watson. He'll get over it.
I saw you tweet something out, or it was a quote tweet, something that Roger said, and you said file that one away. I don't know if he was hinting at moving on, but why don't you fill us in with that story?
Yeah, Eric does not like the Green Bay Packers. I think I've said this before. I don't know people. He does not. I do not think he's going to finish his career with the Green Bay Packers. He does not like the organization. He does not think they've helped him over the years. This is another example of a quarterback upset at the way the organization has done things. It gets glossed over a lot because they have so much success. It's weird because they have so much success. But, it's interesting. When the Eagles played the Packers, we just talked about Zach Ertz. he joked and told Zach, where are we playing together next year? I think I might have said this on the show before. Yeah. He does not want to play there. And I don't think a lot of people know that. And look, if you win the Super Bowl, and they might win the Super Bowl, maybe that changes things. But he has not wanted to play there for a number of years now. And I've always thought that was going to be another situation where a great quarterback was going to end his career somewhere else.
That's certainly a story to keep an eye on. I mean, who blames him? Year after year, that team has done nothing to support him. They draft a quarterback in the most recent draft. It's just been a joke of how they've handled, filling in that supporting cast around him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's completely fair, but that's his perception.
Yeah.
They've gotten, you look at David Bakhtiari, for instance. I mean, that is, if he's not the best left tackle in football, he's probably the second best left tackle behind Teron Armstead. Now they drafted him later and kind of hit on him. A lot of these players, Aaron Jones, they hit on. That's a great running back. Devontae Adams was a first-round pick. He might be the best receiver in football. Overall, they have a really good offensive line. But then again, he was very upset about the Jordan Love pick. And, I've mentioned it in the Carson-Jalen Hurts discussion as well. But things are a little bit different for him because he is old. He's 37, whatever he is, 38 maybe now. But in that range, they have to start thinking about life after Aaron Rodgers, whereas when the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts, you were saying, they got a 27-year-old quarterback. Remember, at the time, nobody knew Carson Wentz was going to take this nosedive.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit different. I think he's a little bit too hard on the Packers and what they've done. But, part of the reason great quarterbacks are great quarterbacks is they are just, at times, really, really difficult people. And they have really high standards.
Right.
And he's one of those guys. And I think it's a little unfair. As I said, the way he thinks of the organization, but that's the way he thinks of the organization.
What do you know about the Bills regarding Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley? This kind of came out of nowhere, at least for me. Both listed as questionable now. Beasley suffered an injury in Week 16, and Diggs has an oblique injury. I'm not sure when that was sustained.
Yeah, that kind of just happened with Stephon, and obviously he's had a phenomenal season coming over from Minnesota in the trade, which worked out for both teams. I mean, that's unbelievable how that worked out for both teams because of what Jefferson was able to do. But, I mean, he is he might be the best route runner in football. He's right there with Devontae Adams or his old teammate Adam Thielen. He's one of those guys who's just always open. And when you're a receiver and you have an oblique injury, I mean, that's serious. And it always happens. It seems to always happen in the playoffs. And generally, I using that as an example, if you go back to the NFC Championship game, when the Eagles blew out the Vikings, that happened to Adam Thielen. He got hurt the week before, and he played through it, but he wasn't the same guy. And that's what I expect to see with Diggs. And generally, that's what happens in the playoffs. And you might say, what's wrong with Stephon Diggs? He's playing through an injury. It's certainly something to keep an eye on.
Did you see that Green Bay, the Packers, are going to allow 6,000 fans for the team's first playoff game, either on the 16th or 17th of January?
Yeah, they had been putting in a little bit, and obviously that's up to local officials, really. That's out of teams' hands. I mean, that's really a local government type thing, depending on your state, city, locality, municipality. most teams were hoping to get some fans. You know, Sean Payton talked about putting fans in quarantine to let them in the stadium if people would be willing to do that.
It's an interesting idea.
You know, yeah, it is.
It is.
And I think people would. I think people would be willing to do that.
Me too.
I wish, you know, more people would be able to go to these games. These games are weird, man. They are really weird.
Yeah.
When you're there, you know, I joke it's like billion-dollar television studios, you know, where you're watching the filming of a TV show, you know, with nobody's there. It's just so antiseptic. And, you know, you look at the NFL came out with their season-ending statistics, home field advantage that we've been talking about all year, worst in history, really, in the Super Bowl era. And that's why. No fans. I mean, no fans, no home field advantage. The only home field advantage is, okay, you got to get, you know, if it's far enough away, you got to get on a plane and you got to do the whole hotel stuff. But once you're at that stadium, that's it. And some of the best home field advantages were totally non-existent. And I really, really hope we get back to normal next season. But the longer this goes on, it looks less and less likely that's going to happen. And man, I can't, Ryan, I can't even imagine if this continues. These stadiums. You look at that stadium in Los Angeles, brand new. Las Vegas, same way. Nothing, no fans, no nothing.
Yeah.
One costs $5 billion to make. The other costs $2 billion, $3 billion. It's just amazing to me.
Can't imagine what's running through the owners' heads, like sitting in an empty, you know, $5 billion stadium like that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I constantly keep saying, you know, people, Carson Wentz and pressing for a trade. You know, you can talk about owners and billionaires and say they can do whatever they want. Well, yeah, but they didn't get to be billionaires by just spending money and not realizing revenue is coming in the other way.
Yeah.
And as I've constantly mentioned, when Jeffrey Lurie signed that contract with Carson Wentz, he assumed that he would have $200 to $250 million more revenue than he does today. So to tack on another $34 million on top of it, that's the biggest hurdle to trading Carson Wentz.
John, we'll get more into all of the wild card games tomorrow night. I want to run through all the games with you then. But I do want your thoughts on the Colts and the Bills, because you're hearing a lot, especially from a betting perspective, a dome team traveling to Buffalo that's really going to impact them.
Yeah.
Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I do think weather can impact, and certainly more so. We just talked about Green Bay. I mean, when we talk about home field, that could be something that impacts certain teams, obviously. If you're a dome team going to that type of environment, maybe that's significant. And Buffalo would be in that same category, potentially, because of the weather situation. But, yeah, I don't understand. Other than that, I don't understand. I've constantly heard this from bettors all year, and they're like, and I talked about it with Rich on the show when he was talking about his club, the Giants, going in and beating Seattle and saying how tough that's to do. Well, yeah, typically it is if the 12th man is there, and it's the loudest building in the NFL, yeah, but it wasn't. So, I mean, it becomes easier. It's not to say for that team it was still a significant upset because they were facing a better team. But I don't know why everyone keeps talking about home field advantage like it's home field advantage. Yeah. The lone exception to that, though, is weather games. So if you have a team not used to playing in weather that is potentially poor versus a team that is used to it. I think that could be the one difference.
One more here before I let you go. There's 6 games this weekend. 4 of them, the point spreads are 6 points or greater. You have the Titans and Ravens sitting at 3 or 3.5, and you have the Rams and Seahawks sitting at 3.5. Every other game, bigger spreads. So what type of upsets, if any, do you think we could potentially see this weekend?
Well, I think, the one upset you're not going to see, even though, again, we're talking about a road team. I mean, look, the Washington football team shouldn't be in the playoffs. If the Eagles didn't tank, they probably wouldn't be in the playoffs. So even though, Tampa Bay's got a lot of holes, obviously, I don't think they're a great team by any stretch of the imagination, but they're just too talented for Washington at this stage of the game. So that's one where I think you can cross off. And then you start looking, you mentioned Buffalo with the injuries, the Rams with, Jared Goff, who knows? Jared Goff's another guy. You expect him to show up and play. No question about that because it's the playoffs, but is he even close to what he typically is? And then if you have to go to the backup quarterback, well, then you're talking about a potential blowout game. So I think that's the kind of stuff you have to look at because injured players tend to fight through those injuries in the postseason, as I mentioned, and a lot of them just shouldn't be out there. And those are the games I think you should keep an eye on. And it's you kind of know it's baked in, and now we have the extra games. You're going to see an upset. There's no question about that.
Absolutely. It's just a matter of, where's it coming from? That's the one question. The Saints, they don't scare me, but I don't really know how good the Saints are. Do you know how good the Saints are?
No, I agree, but that's similar to, the Bears aren't a playoff team.
Yeah.
I think the Saints, I agree with you, are ripe for the picking later in the postseason. I think people overrate them. I think people think they're better than they are. But, the Bears are just not capable they're just not good enough. So I agree with your sentiment, but it's not going to be this week.
Well, we'll get more into it tomorrow night with John. We'll run through every single game over the weekend, get his thoughts, and maybe even his picks. I won't make him give us a score, but we'll talk about who we like against the number and have some fun on a Friday show before the wild card weekend. Maybe we'll sprinkle in some title game talk as well. John, I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Ryan.
Yep. All right, there he is, Johnny Mack. Talking some NFL. There's only so much Carson Wentz and Eagles stuff we can really do, and nothing too new, too pressing that we haven't already dove deep into over the past 3 nights. So figured I'd step outside the Eagles for the last 10, 15 minutes of that conversation and talk some NFL because we're all itching for the NFL news and notes, and Johnny Mack can do it all. All right, let's get to a break. 1 hour down. When we come back, Jeff Parles joins me. Talk about best bets. Who does he like as an underdog upset this weekend? Stay tuned to find out.